everyone. It's good to see. I'm assuming your smiling faces. Um, if you've been watching the YouTube videos from the past, we've been talking about how the division of power between the state governments and the federal governments have been causing issues in our nation. And for one example would be like the Missouri Compromise. We're having issues over what are we going to do with slavery. And we talked about how the Missouri Compromise in 1820, you guys remember that? We did do that, right? Right? How the Missouri Compromise in 1820, it added, it wanted to keep the balance of power within Congress equal, because if you added a slave state, that means that they would have more representation in Congress because of the way our Constitution is set up. And so they wanted to add a free state as well to keep that balance of power even. See, the thing about a compromise is, do you guys like to compromise? How many of you guys like to compromise? I don't like to compromise. You know what I like? I like to get my way. Okay? So the thing about a compromise is nobody's really happy about it, but it just kind of smooths things over for a while. So think of the Missouri Compromise as like a big Band-Aid. Okay? It puts a Band-Aid, but it's a Band-Aid that's like on a massive head wound. Okay? It's going to help a little bit, but is it going to solve any problems? No, you're still going to have a massive head wound. All right? So, and Henry Clay was the one responsible for that, and that the power balance between the state government and federal government over, who should have say over slavery. Should it be the states or should it be the federal government? Okay? So, as we move along here, I know this actually takes place before the Missouri Compromise, but it's important nonetheless. It's the Treaty of 1818. Now, if we make a treaty, is that something that involves just our country? Treaties involve whom? Treaties are agreements between two or more countries. So the Treaty of 1818 is an agreement that the United States and Great Britain enter into, and it has a variety of different aspects. Okay? First thing is what it's going to do is you see this purple area. I don't know if you guys can see that. Oops. The purple, Oregon country, okay? It's going to allow Americans access to that, as it is one of the richest fisheries in the world. Lots of fishing to be done there. So it allowed us to have access to this, and we're going to share it. It also sets our northern boundary of the United States. From this point, if you can see my little laser pointer, can you guys see that from where you are? Okay. It's called Lake of the Woods. It's in present-day Minnesota, I believe. From Lake of the Woods all the way to the Rocky Mountains along what is called the 49th parallel. You guys remember the parallels in geography? The parallels are those imaginary lines that go all the way around the earth, lines of latitude. And this particular imaginary line is not only set during the Treaty of 1818 as our northern boundary, it's still the northern boundary of the United States today. Only today it extends all the way to the ocean. The Treaty of 1818 has its stop here in the Rocky Mountains. Okay? So the 49th parallel to the Rocky Mountains. And so that's a couple of the aspects of the Treaty of 1818. The treaty provided that for 10 years, this will be shared territory. Doesn't belong to the United States, doesn't belong to Great Britain. What could possibly go wrong with this treaty? Because when the time comes, they find out, when we continue to push westward, continue to push westward. We're going to eventually need this and want it. We're just going to be like, oh, Britain, you have it. Or the British going to be like, oh, America, you just have it. You think there's going to be some struggle, some arguing? Yeah, it's going to lead to some potential violence. And that it actually is coming within the next 26 years from this territory. Okay? So that's something to look forward to. All right. Okay, now, this next territory, or this next treaty, I should say, the Adams-Onis Treaty, has to do with this panhandle of land at the southernmost portion of what is now the continental United States. Today, this land is called what? Florida. All right? Florida did not belong to the United States. It was a territory of what empire? Spain. It still belonged to Spain. And semi-tropical Spanish Florida, many Americans believed, because of its geography and just simply God's providence, it was destined to be part of the United States. This part of Florida, which was called West Florida, today it's present-day Alabama and Mississippi, already belonged to the United States. And it just seemed like a natural extension for the United States to claim this, as Spain by this time was totally falling apart. It was a failing empire. And needless to say, though, there was still a lot of Native Americans who resided here, and they were not too keen on being ruled by anyone, whether they be Spanish or Americans. So they rebel. Especially they rebel against the Americans who want them gone and continue to push them west. So, if you're the United States of America and there's open rebellion going on in your territory, what do you do? What would you do if you're the president and there's rebellion? What would you do? Just let them rebel. You're going to call in somebody and go stop them. And the person who gets called to stop them is a man by the name of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson. You ever heard of him? Yeah. Hero of the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812. Idol of the West. And eventually he becomes known as a scourge to the Indians. You guys know what a scourge means? If you are a scourge to something, you are something to be feared. Why do you think he was feared by Indians? Yeah, because he killed them and didn't really even see them as humans. Would kill them for entertainment. Okay? Yes, so definitely, he wants not only to evacuate these, he wants to punish the Indians for their rebellion. He goes and he captures 2 Indian chiefs and just hangs them without ceremony, no last words. He's just like, just hang them and just leave them there. Today his actions would be criminal, 100% criminal. Like, you would not be allowed to do this. And I'm pretty sure that President Madison, President Monroe, that they did not want Andrew Jackson to treat these Native Americans like this. He definitely exceeded his instructions. But needless to say, he did his job. He quelled the rebellion, and, definitely led to a treaty to be made where we could acquire Florida from Spain. And that treaty is called the Adams-Onis Treaty. Adams-Onis Treaty. Sometimes you'll see it labeled as the Florida Purchase Treaty. That's not correct, because it's not just Florida we're purchasing. It gives us some claims out here as well. Anyway, it's the Adams-Onis Treaty, which we do gain Florida in 1819 as a result of the Adams-Onis Treaty from Spain. And this new boundary line is established between the United States and Spanish territory. Okay? So we create a new boundary between the United States and Spanish territory. As you can see, was pretty significant. All of Texas, a third of Colorado, all New Mexico, all of Utah, all of Nevada, all of California, all of Arizona, all of this Spanish territory. Okay? And that becomes the new boundary. So it's like the Red River, and then it looks like a line of latitude. I'm not sure what, maybe this is like the ridge of the Rocky Mountains, and then another line of latitude. Okay? So, but this vague western boundary, it kind of zigzags, doesn't it? It zigzags if you look at it. And it runs zigzags along the Rockies to, I think this is about the 42nd parallel. And then it goes up. But it basically just divides Spanish territory from American territory. Okay? And it's the Adams Onus. The Adams here is John Quincy Adams. He was the Secretary of State. Probably one of the best Secretary of States in American history, John Quincy Adams. Terrible president. Great Secretary of State. All right? Okay, so moving along. Next president. James Monroe. You ever heard of him? Good president, bad president? What do you guys know about him? Nothing? Know anything about him? Well, James Monroe's Secretary of State was John Quincy Adams. And as I said, he was a great Secretary of State. And he helped James Monroe in his administration, which he should, as all cabinet members should, especially when it comes to foreign affairs. All right? Especially when it comes to foreign affairs. Things were finally dying down in Europe as far as violence goes. Remember, think about the French Revolution and people like getting their heads cut off. And then Napoleon taking over. And he almost conquering the world. Trying to invade Russia with an army of 500,000 people. Well, he is defeated. And finally, Europe is in a little bit of peace. Okay? They're no longer worried about war in their own backyard. And so now they can look to expand their empires throughout the world. Well, where might be some areas where those European empires might look to expand? Where might be some areas where European empires might look to expand? Here, the New World, the Western Hemisphere. So James Monroe is very astute with the assistance of John Quincy Adams, and is aware of this possibility that Europeans may start planting flags in our backyard. Colonies. How do we Americans feel about colonies? Do we like being a colony? No, we're pretty fundamentally against it. And so, also, could it potentially be a threat to our security if England and France and Spain were completely surrounded us? Could it be a threat to our security? Sure. And so James Monroe, along with the assistance of John Quincy Adams, creates the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine in 1823. And the Monroe Doctrine had very little implications at the time it was created. Nothing really happened as a result of it at the time it was created. But for the next 150 years, it completely changes American foreign policy. 100%. Okay? But this is what it does. It's really a warning. It's a warning to Europe. And this warning has two features. we really are telling Europe that we're not going to allow two things. You are not allowed to colonize the Western Hemisphere. In other words, this half of planet Earth is off limits to you. It belongs to us. And, butt out. Do not get involved in the politics and affairs of the Western Hemisphere. So to put it simply, it's a policy of non-colonization and non-intervention from America to Europe. It's really directed at England, Russia for certain, the big lumbering bear. Where did Russia have territory in the New World? Right across the ocean, like just very narrow strip of land separating Russia itself from this territory. It's a state that's almost like Canada today. Alaska. Alaska belonged to Russia.
Sorry for the interruption. I need for James Boland to report to the main office. James Boland. Thank you.
So James Monroe and his doctrine that really wants to proclaim the end of colonization in the Americas. And, no more old world governments need to be involved here. So what happens if they do? What are we going to do? What happens if somebody from Europe comes over and wants to create a colony? What are we going to do? What is it? We're going to stop them. The problem is, in 1823, we can't stop anybody. We can barely stop an Indian rebellion in our own territory, much less the might and full force of a foreign empire. We couldn't do it. However, this is the doctrine that James Monroe created. Okay? And that's the Monroe Doctrine. It's a kind of a solemn warning. And like I said, when he issued it, it had very little, made very little splash amongst the republics of the world. He really is just trying to protect us from a future invasion. And it's not really until the 1840s, 20 years after its creation, that President James K. Polk invokes it. And he invokes it for his own selfish reasons, okay? Manifest destiny. But it is a national dogma to this day. Like, you do not get involved in the affairs of the Western Hemisphere. It is the Monroe Doctrine. Is it law? No, it's just kind of a doctrine. It's just it's part of our foreign policy, all right? At the time he issued it, it would probably be more aptly named as the self-defense doctrine. Today we use it to advance our own self-interest. James Monroe issued it to try to protect Americans. Hey, you guys just butt out, leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. But we don't use it like that, over as history has shown. Okay? All right. The Monroe Doctrine also goes to enhance another American idea of isolationism, like George Washington wanted. He wants us to be our own little island, only not little, our island is going to be this half of planet Earth, like North and South America all together, one big island. And it really is, if you look at it. North and South America is kind of one big island, right? Yeah. Okay, so deepened our illusion of isolationism, but that's what it does. Okay. All right. Questions on the Monroe Doctrine? All right. I want to talk to you about one of my favorite presidential elections of all time. It's so funny because we had an election very similar to this one, very recently. Okay. As you can see on the board in your agenda, you can't see, I'm in the way. The election of 1824 is also referred to as the corrupt bargain of 1824. Now, I have the word corrupt in quotation marks. Why would I do that? What does that mean usually? It probably wasn't really corrupt. Okay? So let's look. In the election of 1824, you had several people running for president. John Quincy Adams from Massachusetts, highly intelligent, experienced, and aloof. What does aloof mean? Out of touch. Out of touch. I would be considered aloof if I gave you guys like 3 hours of homework every day. And expect you to do it. I would be aloof because I would be like, have you not remembered what it was like to be a student, Mr. Moore? Like, nah, I'm kind of disconnected from that. I just expect him to do it. That's aloof, okay? Out of touch, all right? Henry Clay, one of my favorite Americans of all time, of Kentucky. Gallant, rough around the edges, like the nightlife. Henry Clay. You have William Crawford from Georgia. Giant of a man, like massive, looked like a walking pop machine. And he's from Georgia. And finally, Andrew Jackson. What state's he from? Nobody knows where Andrew Jackson's from? Tennessee. Andrew Jackson from Tennessee. And we all know him as the gaunt and gusty hero of the Battle of New Orleans and the scourge of Indians in Florida. So, all four of these people proclaim to be Republicans. They're all from the same party. So their identities were kind of fuzzy. So fuzzy, in fact, that two of these guys had the same vice presidential running mate. Two guys had John C. Calhoun on the ticket as their own presidential running mate. So kind of fuzzy as far as who is who. So now the election happens, but the results are kind of fuzzy. They're kind of confusing. All right. Andrew Jackson, war hero, clearly had the strongest appeal in America, especially in what part of America? Well, if we look here, Andrew Jackson's the green. Where do you see the majority of the green? The South and the West. Well, where is he from? He's from Tennessee. He's a Westerner. Now, you don't really think of Tennessee being in the West, but at this time it was. It was one of the farthest western states. So he had a great amount of appeal in the West where he campaigned against the forces of corruption and privilege from people like John Quincy Adams. By the way, who was his dad? John Quincy Adams' dad? John Adams. It's kind of easy to point the finger and say you wouldn't be president if it wasn't for your daddy. Okay? So the election happened, and because there were so many people running in the same party, there was no clear winner. Because when you run for presidency, it doesn't matter if you get the most votes. It matters if you win what? What is the process we use for electing the president called? The Electoral College. You have to get a majority in the Electoral College. Well, because there's so many people running, there is no majority in the Electoral College. So, according to the United States Constitution, when someone does not win a majority of Electoral College votes, who decides who wins the presidency? Who gets to choose? It goes to the House of Representatives. Okay? So, it was very close. Andrew Jackson won the popular vote. He got the most votes. Okay? Henry Clay did not. As you can see here, he won like 3 states and 1 congressional district. So he got very few. He finished last almost. Crawford fell ill, had a paralytic stroke, paralyzed, like he had a stroke. So he's out. Okay? So Henry Clay finished last. William Crawford had a stroke. And so who does that leave? John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. And it goes to the House of Representatives. Who's the Speaker of the House of Representatives at this time? Can you guess? Henry Clay is the Speaker of the House. Is the Speaker of the House of Representatives a very powerful person within the House of Representatives? The most powerful. So, allegedly, there is a meeting that takes place between John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay, who despise each other. They don't like each other. Henry Clay, Kentuckian. John Quincy Adams, kind of a snobby New Englander. All right? However, Henry Clay really hates Andrew Jackson and thinks he's a moron, thinks he's not capable of leadership and not capable of being president. Andrew Jackson isn't very well educated. He was a lawyer, but he was known to misspell the same word 2 different ways in the same letter. Like, not highly intelligent man, okay? And so, Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams have a meeting, allegedly, and after this meeting happens, John Quincy Adams is announced to be the next president of the United States. And oh, by the way, Henry Clay, you're going to be the Secretary of State. At that time, the Secretary of State was like the stepping stone to being president. John Quincy Adams was the Secretary of State. Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe, James Madison, all those people served as Secretaries of State. So if you became Secretary of State, it was pretty much next logical step for you to be the president. Sound good? Is there anything wrong with this? What if there was a bargain? And it's like, hey, you're going to make me Secretary of State, and I'm going to convince the House that you're going to be president. Is that wrong? Is that illegal? Is it corrupt? Could you make the argument it is? Who did make that argument? Andrew Jackson. Well, I won the popular vote. I destroyed you. I should be president. So this election is fraudulent. It's rigged. Does this sound familiar? A lot of people are saying that in America today, even though there's really no evidence, just like there was no evidence here. So I'm telling you, history is kind of repeating itself. Even though history doesn't maybe doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. Okay? So Henry Clay, and he's kind of a risk-taking guy. He's free living, loves to gamble, been known to duel. You know, dueling. I'm going to shoot at you, you shoot at me. Okay? He's been known to do that. So Adams was elected president. Henry Clay announced that he was going to be the new Secretary of State, which was the prize plum, almost certain pathway to the White House. So do you think deals like this happen all the time? You scratch my back, I scratch yours in politics? Every day. Every day. So, deals of this nature have long been in politics in the United States, but the people in Andrew Jackson's campaign didn't see it that way. They didn't like it. And he begins a 4-year campaign against John Quincy Adams. And that's where we'll pick up tomorrow. If you have questions you need,